Hi there, today we're going to talk about a very sensitive topic, which is about lying, and this related to China and the world. Because the reality today is that we in the West often accuse China of lying, and Chinese often accuse us in the West of lying as well. So who's telling the truth? Maybe none of us are, or we all are. But why is the question we should ask? Are Chinese lying? And I'm not generalizing here. And why are Westerners lying? And again, I'm not generalizing there either. Because you can't say that a whole population are liars. I mean, this would be absurd. But the reality is that I believe that there's sometimes different reasons why people lie in the West and in China. And so I want to address that because in my book called Can We Trust China? I've actually written a paragraph within the first chapter talking about the reasons why Chinese lie. And I'm not trying to offend Chinese or anyone here. My idea here is not to say Chinese are liars. No, I don't believe that. I think Westerners are liars as much as Chinese are, and I've experienced that myself. I don't see any difference, but I do see a difference often in the reasons and the incentives and the goals of why Chinese lie and why Westerners lie. And this is what I want to address a little bit in this video. The problem is today we all believe in the West, many countries, and when I talk about the West I really mean Europe, and I mean most of the countries in the world where European immigrants are the majority of the population. Think about America, Canada, about Australia and so on. So many of the Western countries, they believe that Chinese are liars. And they will then say, you can see it from a lot of proof. But then there's even going further. It's not just about people. Very often we talk about the government. And Mike Pompeo, the state secretary under Trump, said very clearly a couple of years ago that the CCP, or the Communist Party of China, the CPC, is just lying. They're all liars, and those who tell the truth basically disappear. That is a statement he made, knowing the fact that almost 100 million people in China are party members. Well, that means that maybe 300 to 400 million people are family of these party members, so half of the Chinese basically are liars. That's what he said. Strong statement. But this is what he believes. And so this is the rhetoric that we have more and more, that Chinese are accused of lying. Now at the same time, that his boss, Trump, said very clearly that whatever was on his mind. And he's been caught with 20,000 false allegations or lies in itself. And that seems to be the new normal of Trump, or used to be the new normal of Trump, and everybody got so used to it that nobody actually cared about it anymore. Well, you can't catch Xi Jinping with lies, but with Trump, it doesn't matter. So what is this all about? If you accuse China of lies, I mean, at least you shouldn't be lying. And even Pompeo himself said very clearly that we lied, we cheated, and we stole when he was director of the CIA. So for me, I mean, then accusing someone else of lying, well, you've actually said, I've been trained to lie, kind of a double standard. Now, I don't want to go there, but what I want to set this straight is that today it's very clearly that this rhetoric that Chinese are liars has come from the top down. And the Chinese population and the Chinese government has the last years been really reactive on saying, no, it's the West that is lying. And so I think we should go into some detail. These are two books coming out in November, and these two books clearly show the polarization that we have when it's about lying. There's a book about America saying that America is full of lies for its whole history, and I would love to read the book to understand what it's all about. At the same time in November there's another book talking about the Chinese lies and spies and basically that they fooled the world and probably are still fooling the world, and I would love to read that book as well. So there's a polarization happening today when it is about lying and accusing the other party that they're liars. I believe everybody lies. It's as simple as that. The question is not who lies. We have to understand why Chinese lie different than maybe why the Westerners lie different. And so we all lie, but some lie, it's a white lie because we want to protect ourselves maybe, or the people we love, or people we trust, want to protect the group. Maybe we lie because it actually would offend someone. I mean, these are small lies and everybody does it and we don't really care about it. But this could escalate very often in that people really see benefits of lying to gain more money, to gain more importance, more status, and then it ends up with countries lying to and ultimately creating wars and everything in between, a wide small lie and a war somewhere in Iraq, for example. So this is where it's all about. But we have to look at the history and the background of China and the West to kind of figure out, is there any difference between Chinese and the rest and the West when it's about lying? And I would love at the end if you add comments on that and maybe add your idea about why there is a difference, or if you believe there's no difference, you can mention it as well. But for me, it's all about a dialogue to figure out, is there something in that context that we really need to understand China better and for China to understand the West better? If we go into the first one, the culture, I mean, it's clear Chinese culture is very different from Western culture. Western culture, again, mainly European culture, specifically in its long history. And so what we see is that Chinese culture is very much embedded in Confucianist philosophy. And so this is a lot about trying to protect others when lying is involved. This is about keeping face and saving face and giving people face. And so lies are very much about a group collective feeling. While in the West, I mean, lies relies in the basics of Christianity very often. And that means it's immoral to lie. It's selfish to lie. And if you lie, you have to go to confession to actually get rid of all the bad things that you did. But this is about good and bad. While in China, it's not about good and bad. It's about the environment and about the context. And so the big difference in Chinese environment or context is that this is about modesty. Lying often is relating to not wanting to show off and be modest, while in the West, it's very often the opposite, where lying is used very often as overconfident for self-image, self-promotion. This is all fine in the West, that you actually use some lie, small lie, to actually promote yourself. In China, that is not so good, because that would hurt others potentially. This is also about avoiding humiliation. This has to do with losing face and gaining face. It's about keeping the group harmony, and a lot to do with status and respect, and basically making sure that the other person doesn't lose his face and can self-preserve his face, or you can. And so there's a big difference. And so in the West, it's all about good and bad. It's about recognizing good deeds. It's about altruism and doing good for others, for charity. So you don't lie because you want to help others. This is what I learned as a kid. We have to do this. And this is how I grew up. And if you are caught with a lie, well, just go to confession and get rid of it. It's as simple as that. So this has a lot to do with how you look and perceive others on itself. Well, in China, it's really about protecting others. And so this is more the Chinese thinking or the Chinese way of thinking when it's related to lies is actually very close to Immanuel Kant, who's talking about this categorical imperative, which means for Chinese, lying is almost a duty if it can actually protect the harmony. Well, for us, we see it as bad to lie. And so it's immoral. And if you do it, I mean, you have to have your reasons to do it. But overconfidence is fine, while in China, that proves that you're actually lying if you're actually having something to hide. So very interesting to see these differences. Now, the second thing has to do with history. And I want to talk about the traumatic history of China and the traumatic history of the West. For China, it's very, very clear. It's the Cultural Revolution from 1966 to 1976. 10 years of trauma. And this is where every Chinese had to show allegiance to the Communist Party. And this created a whole different way of thinking about truth and fact and lies. When we look at the West, I mean, we've been lying very often in our past, specifically in the colonial past, to get benefits, but we did it with a higher moral compass. And that is the strange thing about it. We've lied about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq and invaded the country. I mean, the Americans firstly did. But we believe that was to liberate that country. And so somehow we've made ourselves believe that lying is justified if we actually are crusading for things that is better for the world. Our imperial past is catching up with us. Now in China, the Cultural Revolution has also had a huge impact on many people. Specifically today, the older people. And if you meet older people in China, I mean, you feel that they have different moral compass than many young people. And that is because their compass has been shaken during that period. It was a period where nobody could be trusted, and the farmers suddenly were important, and so the peasants, and then the elite was suddenly a dangerous part of the classes, and they had to protect themselves. And so you saw a situation during 10 years where everybody was in chaos and everybody was wondering if someone else could actually humiliate him or rob him or basically be thrown into prison. Or this was a moment of matter of survival. And so the interesting thing about the Cultural Revolution, or the scary thing in a way, is that many people had started to see lying as their only way to survive in this chaos. And so this is where many older people still lie, because they have lost a little bit that moral compass. Now younger people, it's very different today, but this is something that's still around, and we have to realize that. The other thing has to do with the West. And if you look at the West, I mean, the justice or injustice that we see in the world is often a reason for us in the West to start lying. And we feel it completely justified to actually make sure that the end justifies the means. Because we feel that we are the protector of higher morals. Specifically in America today, they feel that very often. This is the same as the Crusaders in the Middle Ages. This is about maintaining the order, or what we believe. Before it was about Christianity, now it's about the international or Western order that we've created. This is about fighting for freedom and democracies, the values that we have. And we want to liberate countries and from regimes and repression that we see is actually bad, not just for the people, but also for the whole world. And so it's interesting to see that we get involved in other cultures, in other countries, because we believe that we actually should help them. And do we always help them? Usually or often we don't. But the reality is that lying is totally okay if it's for a higher moral. This is something many Chinese do not understand. And we do not understand why many older Chinese people maybe have completely lost the moral compass. But if you've lived in the Cultural Revolution, I'm sure you would understand. Now, the second thing, or the third thing, has to do about the future. And the future of China and the West is very different. If you look at the Chinese dream and the American dream, I mean, it's going in the same direction, but it's a very, very different dream. Now, the Chinese dream started in 1978, or when Deng Xiaoping opened the country to do business with the world, and it was very closed off before. And this was like a floodgate that opened up, and suddenly everyone could actually benefit from that new market, that new opportunity, the new world that was being created. We always forget this is only 40 years ago, a little bit more than 40 years ago. And for most people, it's only been 30 years, so one generation. While the American dream has been around since the Second World War, or after the Second World War, and this was really about, yeah, you can move up ahead, and if you just trust in yourself, you work really hard, then you can actually benefit from becoming part of the middle class and getting all the benefits of a great life. And this was really where it changed a lot. Because what happened is that in the West, we saw that many people were told after the Second World War that the American dream is about equality, it's about opportunity for everyone, and so everybody can become whoever they want as long as you work hard, and then if you're rich or when you're rich, and people who are rich, they will share as well to give you opportunity as well. And so this gives everybody the chance to become better. And every voice counts, and everybody will be heard. And this is something that for many Americans after 40, 50, 60 years has sounded more and more as a myth. It has started to sound more and more as a myth because most people did not achieve the American dream. And of course there's like this 1 or 10% of the Americans that have all the wealth that they could dream of. But for many people it's just a myth. In Europe, it's a little bit better, but still we believe in that better future by working hard and believing in the story. And so the result of that is that there became a counter-reaction, which in Silicon Valley they call it fake it until you make it. And so like the Wolf of Wall Street is really about just lie as much as you can, as long as you can make money, and as long as people believe it, it's fine, you can belong to the rich people. And so this became another normal. So people in America, but also in the West, often start lying to gain more because they feel this is their dream that they have realized on themselves. And so it's about moving ahead. While in China, it's more about not being left behind. And this is a very different mindset, because most Chinese that were lying after the opening up, which we've experienced often in the West, has to do a lot about the fact that just before that they were really poor and their families were poor and they wanted to escape an endless poverty. And this new rich that you saw in China was like all about materialism and showing off, because they saw around them people getting rich constantly and they didn't want to end up behind the dam, and they wanted to make sure that they would not be left behind. It became an extremely competitive society where everybody worked, just like America, really, really hard, but when you did, very often you actually could improve life. So they still believed in this Chinese dream and still do today. And so the other thing is that because China changed so much, the legal system did not always follow the change, which means that the benefits outweighed the risk. You could lie, get away with it, basically get rich, and nobody would care, or it would be 10 years later before the legal framework would actually catch you. And so this was a very different thing. This was about not being left behind, and after me there's going to be the flood of poor people, and that's not my problem. And so this is really something that Chinese 20, 30, 40 years ago made them become very accustomed to lying, just because they didn't want to leave behind. Just like in America, it's a lot about fake it until you make it. Now, this is generalizing again, but the idea is there that in the extremes you can see that it's very different reasons. The fourth thing has to do with society. And this is because in China, a new society was created in the past 30 years. I mean, a completely new environment where it was all about entrepreneurship, about private companies, about new cities, about urbanization. I mean, this was a different China than just 30 years ago. And so this is a new reality, new money that was created. And so China got accustomed to a totally new world or image than they used to know and their parents or grandparents had. Well, in the West, what we see, specifically the last 10, 20 years, it has been a lot about seeking attention. Society is all about either you stand in, or you stand out, or you belong, and this is about being accepted and being seen, and so who you are and your identity was important, while the Chinese were way too busy to get rich and way too busy to move ahead in life to actually care about being seen, or being like everyone else. Now, the difference is that the sky was the limit in China in the past 30 years. And I've lived that miracle myself, living in Shanghai since '96 until 2016. And so I've just seen that sky being the limited. And there you could just every day see the Chinese pragmatism. This was all about just making sure you move ahead constantly, because otherwise your reality could become, or that new reality could become your nightmare if you're not part of the growth of China. And so there was a lack of legal framework, there was a new urban society, and so more anonymity, and so it all became much more anonymous and people didn't know each other, so the family relationship culture changed. And with that, of course, you're around people that you don't know. It means lying is a lot easier. And so that created a new way of making money. And so Chinese were very pragmatic money makers, and lying was often embedded in that to make more money, not because they just wanted to get rich, but basically because they believed that they had to move on to actually, it was every man for himself, simply said. And so they didn't care as much about the people around that. Now that has changed a lot today because we're in a new environment. But over the past 30 years, specifically since the 1990s, I mean, you could see it was all every man for himself. And in the West, it wasn't about just being looking at yourself, but how people looked at you. And so this was about your social environment, and either you stand in or you fit in, but somehow you need to figure out how to be part of this new society. And so you saw, like with beauty filters and the fear of missing out, you know, all these words, and influencers and catfishing. I mean, this is full of lies. People were lying about themselves because they wanted others to see them differently. I mean, not that in China that's not the case, but Chinese were much too busy with themselves than to be busy with how others were looking at themselves. And except, of course, if they wanted to belong within a certain relation group and network group, that's a different story. But not towards the outside social media. That's much younger in China. And so the Western way of thinking has a lot to do with social media anxiety and constantly being worried that you're not doing the right thing and having the right experience, and this fear of missing out and so on. And so this is all about being accepted and being seen in the West. While in China, it is all about that the capitalism and making money was being accepted, which wasn't before. And so what changed there is, from a societal point of view, that in China it's all about the new way of living, while in the West it's all about the world looking at you. And so this creates a different reason for lying. And so the lying of Chinese very often is embedded in wanting to move ahead, wanting to move forward and getting a better life. While for us, it's much more about a protective mindset and making sure we keep whatever we have. And I'm not saying this is always like that. I'm not saying everybody's like that. But I do believe there's a general trend which is different. And if you see that trend, actually, it makes a lot more sense why the Chinese are lying and why the Westerners are lying. And unless we reverse that way of thinking and have a different lens on it, I think it's very difficult to accept that other people are lying for different reasons than we are. Now, the reality, and I think that's the message I want to give. I mean, China has a lot of problems in its past, traumatic past. I mean, they have a cultural challenge when it comes to lying. They have, I mean, other issues. I've addressed all of them. But if you look today at the middle class with almost 500 million people, I mean, they are almost becoming a society very, very similar to our society in the West, specifically when I think about Europe or America. I mean, the people in the middle class don't need to lie anymore in the same way as they used to get where they are today. And so in my view, I think the reason that Chinese are lying and the reason that we are lying is starting to become very, very similar. And that has simply to do, in my view, because the Chinese has evolved in time and became a modern society. But I do think that it was important, or for me it's important, to address some of these things, some of these lies, because I do believe it can help us to understand sometimes why in the past Chinese have lied for different reasons than we have lied in the past, and why today it's also different.